What's really cool about it is once it's running, it's completely decentralized. And then more and more people will do it because they're having a good outcome with it. And there's also a good social component to it. So it creates an abundance of capital that enters that jurisdiction, which means that the interest rates fall. So then you start seeing a normalization of the interest rates in the developing world with the developed. Talk crypto. So where do we all come from? So in the 1980s, after the internet was really starting to get rolling, a lot of people were discussing, well, what does this all mean for the world? And so there was first this concept of, well, if you could move information instantaneously anywhere between people, it's really going to change the information economy. And we're going to move from this building cities around repositories of information like palaces, libraries, universities, and everybody can just live anywhere they want and they can communicate with anybody real time. They even wrote things like the whole Earth catalog and all these other ideas. Well, a subgroup of those cypherpunks who were thinking about, well, what does this move for information? We're also thinking about, well, what does this mean for value? Money, financial transactions, these types of things. And so this group of people started coming up with ideas of how do we create a financial system that is global first, always on, digital, and behaves kind of like how the internet behaves. The problem is that that's super hard in practice because you don't want central authorities to be in power with it. So it started kind of a 30-year quest from the 1980s to about 2009 to figure out how do you do e-money or the electronic movement of value between people who don't know each other without needing a central intermediary. And that's where Bitcoin basically came from. But, it comes out. And then immediately after it came out, people started saying, well, that'll never work because it has to obtain market value. You have to get a population. You have to somehow in a centralized way get a community around it. And it took about 5 years for Bitcoin to get to that point. So from 2009 to about 2014, we saw that grow. And then eventually Bitcoin got over $1 billion. And then suddenly, once that infrastructure was in place, people said, okay, this is here to stay, but we'd like to do useful, interesting things with it. And so, for example, maybe I'd like to issue my own currency. Maybe I'd like to connect art to something. Maybe I'd like to do land titles and deeds. Maybe I want to do water rights with it. Maybe I want to build a supply chain with this. Maybe I want to vote with this and vote online, these types of things. Okay, that's great. But the problem is that Bitcoin didn't really let you do that. So a second generation had to come, and that's really what the Ethereum revolution was about. And that was the idea of a smart contract. And once you had that, you had programmability. And once you have programmability, then suddenly you have things like decentralized finance, the DeFi revolution. You have things like NFTs that a lot of people have heard of. You have oracles, you have stable coins, all these other terms that have come out, ICOs, STOs. You have an acronym salad that basically comes through. So then the problem is that, well, that's awesome. It doesn't scale to the needs of millions to billions of users, and it's not really useful for a drop-in replacement for a legacy financial system. So you can't just take Ethereum and you put it into Ethiopia or Kenya or Botswana or Burundi, or put it into a local community like an indigenous population and say, okay, here you go. You can run a whole governance system with it. Because the operating cost is too high. The protocols don't scale like that. So then the next generation came and they really focused on that design space. That's where the Cardanos come from and the Solanas and these other things. And so this industry is now about 13 years in. We've gone from nothing to over 100 million people. At the all-time high, there was over $2 trillion of value. There's still about 1.2 trillion in value. There's hundreds of marketplaces across the world. And it's really starting to touch on everything. It's touching on trade, it's touching on identity management, it's touching on voting, in addition to the financial stuff of just the movement of value. And even nation states now, for example, like El Salvador, has adopted Bitcoin as a national currency. So it's created a really cool global conversation of where is all of this going and how do we resolve some hard problems like governance problems, regulatory problems. The cool thing about protocols is they don't care where you're born, what language you speak, what the color of your skin is. They don't care about any of these details. All they care about is you follow the protocol. So everybody has equal access regardless of their money. And every business has equal access. So the Exxon Mobils of the world have the same access as the local farmer. The billionaire has the same access as the poor person living in the streets of Toronto. They all use the exact same system in that respect. And we've never really had that before. And we've never had that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in every single nation at the same time. And everybody gets to interact with it. So it's a really cool space. The point of blockchain technology, the point of the cryptocurrency space is saying, well, maybe we can be that trust engine, that connecting tissue that you can then build consumer experiences, corporate experiences, and government experiences on top of, that can act as that auditor, act as that immutable ledger. And things like smart contracts and all these other details are just the execution details of how do you actually accomplish that? How do you encode those types of things? For example, I know you're voting right now. How do you know that the voting system people use has high integrity? Well, in America, I would love to have the ability to know that my vote was counted. I'd love to know that my vote was counted the way I thought it was counted. And I'd like to know that the integrity of the entire election system is preserved. In other words, no more people voted than people registered, and everybody who registered was lawful to register. Very simple request. A democratic system requires our belief for this. Right now, in most modern democracies, we're told, trust us. Don't worry, we got to figure it out. You can't audit it. You can't verify it yourself. When you move to a blockchain system, you remove central institutions in the audit and oversight. What you do is you build into the system itself the self-auditing capabilities, that inclusive accountability where you can verify those types of things. So not only can you vote online, but then also you can check and verify that the vote was correct, and you can check and verify the integrity of the entire system is preserved. So I think what you need to do is go specific and find what's important to the individual and say, all right, what problem can we solve that we couldn't solve before? And it could be as simple as, I'm going skiing in Aspen, Colorado, and I tumbled down the hill and broke my leg, and now the doctors there need to get my medical records from Ottawa. How do I broker them and move them across the border, especially if you're unconscious? To something as complicated as we have a multinational trade deal with 5 big companies and 3 governments involved, and how do we structure a deal to keep everybody honest and have an audit and oversight layer to make sure that people can't cheat in that consortium? The point of our industry is to build a stack of technology that can service both ends of the spectrum with one universal, and give every single person access to those. Basically, anyone in the world can try to attack Bitcoin at any time. Anyone in the world can try to attack Cardano at any given time. So given that you have such a huge attack surface and everybody's trying to break it, if it survives 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, that's much better than a centralized system that tends not to get attacked surviving, because you've already gotten a lot of the bugs and kinks. And that's the magic of the open source principle. This is kind of something like Cherkov's law in cryptography. That it's an analogous concept. It says the security of a system should only rely on the secrecy of the keys, not on obscuring the protocol. You want the protocol to be publicly known, because then everybody could try to break it, and then you end up getting significantly more reliable, resilient systems. So you look at Bitcoin, for example, 13 years of history there, 100 million plus users have touched it, played with it, and everybody, including national security agencies and governments, have tried in some way to co-opt, corrupt, or break the system, and it stayed very resilient in that respect. So that's a certain burden of proof that will convince government actors and Fortune 500 actors to start taking it seriously. So that's kind of where we're at. We're in the gangly teens of the cryptocurrency industry, where we've started to actually have the real global conversation. Global regulation is happening. People are working with the systems. They're building things at scale of millions of people. And we're starting to have a conversation of how do you get consumers to love it? Some never will. They'll be left out. Legacy systems are required for them, and it's moral to do that. But most will slowly move over, and they're going to move over when something of their comfort zone moves over. Maybe Facebook supports it, or maybe Gmail supports it, or maybe it's now a new icon on their cell phone or something like that. Or other people are first adopters who are already in the crypto space, and they just bring people in through different means. Like, no one in the art community, music community cared at all about crypto until NFTs came. And now that NFTs are here, you have Metallica and Snoop Dogg and all these other people having conversations about NFTs, and they're trying to bring their fans in and build businesses on top of it one way or the other. So you kind of have to wait also for the technology to catch up and solve a problem in a particular vertical. And once that occurs, then you end up getting consumerization and adoption, and ultimately consumer trust in the process. Right. In general, when you look at the developing world, there's a kind of a convergence of bad forces. First, you have very usurious marketplaces. So you have remittances at 15%. You have lending at 85%. You have a lot of predatory behavior. Second, You have exclusion from the global financial order, meaning that it's very difficult for people, even if they want to get a bank account and get economic identity, build a reputation, become creditworthy, and be respected in a global marketplace. I'm just thinking about the discrimination. If you have a business in Addis Ababa or in Nairobi, and you go to Silicon Valley and say, "Hey, would you like to invest in my startup?" No, well, we just don't know how to do business in that jurisdiction. Sorry. So all those global capital markets are basically excluding you. And so you have a really hard time lifting yourself up. And then you also have geopolitical instability that robs you of the things that we take for granted in places like Canada or the United States, like stable currencies, stable education systems, stable governments, and so forth. So when you have those convergence of factors, it creates a perpetual poverty engine. And the only way to get out of it is to physically leave the jurisdiction and go to a more stable economy. And then what you do is you send money home, which is why you see so many remittance inflows into countries that suffer from this. Well, the point of crypto is saying, well, we can do better. So you don't have to trust the government. You don't have to trust the local currency. You don't have to trust the local marketplaces. You have a system that can come in the absence of trust of those central institutions, build up a parallel economy